Okay, well, good morning to all of you who've been joining in to our session today, and thanks so much for joining us. I think we are going to start in, even though I think we'll probably still see folks coming onto the line in the next little bit. So welcome to this. This is our fourth and final session of a webinar series hosted by the Climate and Agriculture Initiative of BC. Over the last month, we've been discussing some of the ways climate change is impacting BC's farmers and ranchers, and our presenters have been sharing different approaches, tools, and resources that provide examples of climate adaptation solutions in action. If you missed any of the earlier sessions, we will be sharing the full set of recordings in the coming weeks, and they'll both be sent directly back to all of the registrants. And then they'll also be shared through the CAI YouTube channel. I am Emily McNair. I'm the director of the Climate and Agriculture Initiative. And I have the privilege of hosting today's session, which is focused on agricultural water management in a changing climate. I also have the privilege of working and living on the unceded territory of the Lekwungen people, a home of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. As we get started, please take a moment to introduce yourselves on the chat and let us know where you're joining us from. We're always happy to see that exchange happening on the chat. And please be sure to direct your messages to the panelists and to the attendees so that everyone can see your message. So this morning, we have three excellent presenters that are joining us to share information about two very different projects that are supporting producers with addressing the challenges of our changing water resources in British Columbia. This critical topic is, I think, particularly top of mind. We certainly had very high registration for this session. I think because of the season that we've all just experienced and the producers experienced across the province. And we are extending this session from the original 60 minutes to a full 90 minutes, just to make sure that we can have a really fulsome set of presentations and a good amount of time for some questions and some discussion. So I'm just going to launch in and provide a very brief bit of background about the Climate and Agriculture Initiative. Some of you will have to bear with me because you'll have heard this before. And then just a little bit of a broader introduction to the issue of climate change and agricultural water. So hopefully many of you who are joining us have heard of the Climate and Agriculture Initiative and are at least a little bit familiar with what we've been doing. We've been around for 13 years now, providing a proactive and pan-agricultural approach to climate change in British Columbia. And we work collaboratively with a whole range of partners, including agricultural organizations, producers, governments, researchers, to develop and implement projects and to create resources and tools that will support agricultural adaptation to climate change. The projects we deliver fall under the climate change adaptation programming of the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries. And our program and project funding is provided by the provincial and federal governments through the Canadian Agricultural Partnership. Project funding and in-kind support are also provided by a whole range of other partners that include agricultural groups, local governments, NGOs, and even individual producers who are often involved and engaged and dedicate a lot of time to our projects. So speaking of the impacts of drier conditions and drought conditions and the whole bundle of changes that are happening in our hydrology in the province, in many areas of BC, average summer precipitation is decreasing. Summers are becoming hotter and drier, and we're experiencing more of those extremely hot periods. This summer, we sure had that. At the same time, in many areas or most areas of the province, there is a decrease in average snowfall in the winter and the spring. And this is also resulting in a greater likelihood of earlier and more rapid snowpack melt, resulting in earlier peak stream flows and reduced stream flows and water availability during summer and early autumn. At the same time, we're having more frequent and extreme precipitation events when we see these large quantities of precipitation coming in very compressed periods of time, and that results in increased runoff. There's less likelihood that that water can be absorbed in the soil, and often it's not being stored in reservoirs. So we have this very challenging set of conditions that result in greater water requirements for crop and livestock, needed for crop and livestock health, while at the same time we're experiencing reduced water supply. This also creates a scenario where producers are seeking out new approaches for water infrastructure and water management. So there are many types of solutions, leadership, and action that are going to be needed to address this combination of challenges with water that are facing our producers and indeed are facing our communities as a whole. The projects that Andrew and Lisa and Andy are going to be speaking about today really represent just a couple of different types of action. They're in different locations, they're at different scales, so they're really interesting kind of combination of types of projects that are happening to support agriculture with adapting. But both of these projects are really about building knowledge to enable solutions, decisions, and changes that are really necessary for managing through the challenges I've outlined. So this slide is just to quickly acknowledge that we do have CAI has undertaken a number of projects related to water and water management across the province. And if you go to our website, you can search by climate impact or by region or with our library. And we do invite you to do that and to learn more about some of our other work. So without further ado, we can start moving into today's presentations, which I know is why you are all here. We're going to be starting with a project from the Kootenay and Boundary region that is focused on developing strategies for improving water conservation on farms. And this work is being led by Andrew Bennett. And then after we have a bit of Q&A for Andrew, we'll move into the joint presentation with Leisa Yee and Andy Nadler, who will be sharing their work that's happening in Delta to model, monitor, and share salinity data with producers. And so please, just for housekeeping, if you want to ask a question, please type that into the Q&A box, which you can find in your Zoom control pad for those of you who have not been in one of these Zoom sessions, which is, I'm sure, none of you. And there's also an upvote option where you can give a question a thumbs up if you'd like to see it prioritized and be answered, hopefully first or be at the top of the queue. So I'm just going to introduce our first speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Andrew Bennett. Andrew has many hats. He's the principal of Living Lands Agroecology and a partner in Moon Gravity Farms. He is also an environmental farm plan advisor and program developer for the new Regional Agricultural Liaison Services program in the Kootenays, and also the very able lead for this work that he will be speaking about right away. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Andrew. Please go ahead and set up your screen share.
Thanks very much, Emily. I'll just do that right now. Is that coming through?
It is.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's great to see people from all around the province. I call it the Farm Water Fix that we're going to talk about. It's been a 2-year project, and I'm looking forward to giving you some of the details. First, though, I'm happy to see outside that it's snowing on the unceded territory of the Sinixt and the Tunaha, where I'm very fortunate to live here in Rossland. And what we're going to talk about today is specific to the Kootenays and Boundary, but I would say that it's got real provincial interest. None of the issues are specific to our corner of BC. They're really pan BC. So let's see how this goes. All right. The main point I'd like to make today is that all of us on this call today, I see 100 of us at the moment, and around it, each of us in our own vocation is an educator. And that's really what we need at the moment, is a lot of knowledge transfer on how to adapt to these climate changes. So that's what we'll be looking at, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a scientist, a parent, or if you're an extension worker in agriculture, such as myself with the Kootenay and Boundary Farm Advisors and with the Environmental Farm Plan. We're always just trying to pass on good ideas to each other and improve together. So this is where this project came from, is trying to identify what are the problems farms are facing as the climate changes. And so I was very very fortunate to work with Bruce Naka, who you'll see a bunch of pictures of coming up. We took a tour of the region in 2020 and have since been in contact through 2021 with a number of farms. Bruce has 40 years of experience in the irrigation industry, and his knowledge and expertise were absolutely fundamental to the success of the project, which has culminated in a 4-part webinar series, which I'll plug, and upcoming. Right now, I'm just working on a number of videos that are going to be educational videos. So that's the outcome. Here we go. First, a little bit about me. My background is more in ecology. I worked on a bunch of farms and eventually started, my wife and I started our farm 10 years ago here in Rossland. Chickens, goats, nursery, orchard, young kids. They're kind of like farm animals. And we've got, this led to the Kootenay Boundary Farm Advisors, which I work on with the coordinator, Rachel Rusin. And that has been a really excellent experience. More about that in a moment. And of course, the Environmental Farm Plan, which people across BC are probably familiar with, but again, another program that is very worthwhile and helping a lot of farms out there. I'm also a certified irrigation designer. The reason I mention that, my expertise in this project has maybe been more about facilitation than irrigation, but there were no certified irrigation designers in my region for hundreds of kilometers in all directions. There's a real lack of them. So if you love irrigation, there's a need for more designers. The Kootenay Boundary Farm Advisors is a very unique program in BC, and it has allowed us, mostly Rachel and myself, through funding from 3 regional districts and the Columbia Basin Trust, to put together an extension program. And we were originally tasked with technical expertise to try and get technical expertise to farms. We've learned that's not the most important job. The most important job is building relationships, one-on-one relationships with farmers, with ourselves, between farmers and experts who we connect them with on a case-by-case basis. And you know, our favorite thing is really field days where people share and connect. Here, Wilf Lindquist on the left is a fencing expert, also a farmer. Talking with Mike Rudy, who himself is a farmer from down the way. Both, he had just spent the whole summer building fence. We were having a fencing workshop on a completely different type of fence. We walked past this pile of trash and instantly they're having another conversation about the pros and cons of woven wire. This is exactly what needs to happen. We need to be getting farms together. People are really craving this, and it's an important part of the educational experience. The resources that are out there online, like my webinars and soon to be my videos, sure, they're out there. They're good, but these connections are really important. What are the gaps that we're facing? Certainly water and soil are the key considerations, but what specifically about them do we need to know more about? So this is where Bruce and I went on our trip. What are the gaps and how do we fill them? Before I get to some of those answers, first, this is the most technical part of the presentation, so just bear with me for a moment here. Climate change is a problem. This is the first and major issue that people need to understand, is that we need to adapt. We were already struggling as farms pre-climate change, and this has really made problems worse. What we're looking at here is a graph comparing the BC Agriculture Water Calculator, which is what the province uses to set your water license limits. And it's based on modeling of the climate between the years 2000 and 2010. And we're comparing that to weather station data coming out of Grand Forks for Farm West from a weather station there. It was only installed in 2019, so I'm using the full season of 2020 and 2021. This is for a field of forage run by a sprinkler. And what you can see is that the agriculture calculator says you only need to start irrigating a tiny bit in May, 4 inches in June, 7 inches in July, 6 inches in August, and 4 inches in September. But the weather has really blown this out of the park. We're looking at starting irrigation in April and May with 5 inches, double the amount in June, right the way through peak July, August into September. We're looking at a 40% increase in water demand already compared to what this calculator shows based on modeling from 10, 20 years ago. Here's another way to look at the same issue. This is evapotranspiration, ET. Evapotranspiration is a measure of how quickly the soil is drying out. So when your ET is higher, you need to irrigate more frequently. And this is a big issue because many irrigation systems like wheel moves are very labor intensive to get back to the same place again frequently. It's a major issue in BC. And peak ET in the calculator, this sets your legal limit to how much water, how fast you can draw water, your peak flow rate. It's set on 10-day averages. So in theory, these 10-day averages here from 2020 and 2021 shouldn't be popping much over this line. Maybe, a couple of times a season, a little bit over the line. They're blasting past them. The 40-day averages are up at 7 millimeters this season and 6 millimeters the season before. So we're looking at really big increase in water demand. I'm going a little too slow here, so I'm just going to pick up the pace a little. I'm seeing Emily looking at me there. Three major problems. There's a million problems, but let's nail it down to three. And then we'll look at sort of three examples within each of these. Water source problems. This is a major climate change issue. Once the water gets to the farm, it's often distributed unevenly. That's an equipment issue. That's an irrigation technical issue. And then the third problem is overwatering and underwatering. This is a scheduling problem. This is, even if you have a good system, if you're not aware of your soil conditions and the weather conditions, you can both overwater and underwater on the same farm, wasting water and reducing yields. So first, water source problems. Many sources remain unlicensed. If you have groundwater and you're not licensed, I know it's a pain, but really for your long-term farm benefit, go get your water licensed, plant your flag on your water resource. The second issue is more climate-based. It's unpredictable. Water sources are changing a lot. And we also have a lot of bad intakes out there. And this can cause a lot of different problems. Here, the fixes are mostly getting better equipment, sometimes more labor. And so these are questions of money. Here we've got irrigation ditch this is in the Creston area. This is water table water that most people do not have licensed in that area. If this is you, get it licensed. Surface water sources that aren't licensed. Groundwater, deep drilled wells that aren't licensed. We need to, it's in your best interest to plant your flag. This is a neat one. You saw these guys earlier. These are the Pegans right here. They're telling us about how unpredictable the Wild Horse River is here. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, this river blasted this bank and took out this entire peninsula where the truck is parked. You can no longer park a truck there. This is happening more frequently around the region. And then at the other end of the season, in the fall, this is in August, this is way lower than normal. This reservoir is tapped out. This is the kind of problem that we're facing. Water levels changing like crazy. This is the Kootenay, and it changes level because of electricity production. And this farmer's come up with a really great system. It's a raft with a spinning, self-cleaning intake, a real brilliant solution to a water level that can change by 40 feet. Up in the mountains, creeks blasting through. This was just right after a flash flood. The guy had to re-dam it with pallets and baling twine. Siltier water and muddier water is causing filtration problems, clogging this system. Here's Peter Feldman. He's an expert in intakes. He is a brilliant farmer. Here he is literally out on a limb, pulling the come along that is on his neighbor's intake. We were talking about how this whole thing should be redesigned, but in the meantime, he helped out his neighbor and fixed the intake. Here we are in the looking at the soil with Bruce. This is the real issue in most irrigation systems is that the water gets distributed unevenly because pressures change, hydraulics change, the sprinklers or nozzles aren't matched to the soil. Poor maintenance, different changes, different sizes. So for example, here, this gun should be up at about 60 to 80 PSI. It's down at 20 PSI. It's just slapping water on the ground, which creates this kind of impact on the soil, huge runoff and soil impacts. Here, sprinklers were clogged and not noticed. So as the wheel was moving along, huge patchiness. Here, runoff from a drip system. that was started too late in the season. And so the soil was dry and the water is not going in, the cherries continue to wilt and the water is pouring off the surface. Here, water pouring off the surface from a gun that leads to pooling. Leaks, worn nozzles, holes in your drip line. I mean, these are issues that are solved with new equipment. Let's get to the third problem, because this is the one that we've focused our project on, because it's the low-hanging fruit, overwatering and underwatering. And the solution is really understanding how water is stored in the soil and how the soil dries out. Again, that's evapotranspiration. We also need to know about effective rain. A lot of times I hear from people, oh, you know, it's been raining so much. When you look at how much of that rain gets into the soil, it's minimal, especially in our region. We're very droughty here. Different on the coast, of course, but here we get very little rain in the season, and people overestimate how much it is. We also, you know, need to adjust to the crop. The crops change their needs over the season. Wheel move intervals are a real interesting one. People will often leave their wheel in one place for too long, overwatering it, leaching out the soil. And then it takes 2 weeks for the wheel to come back again. And by then the soil is parched, dry, and droughty. So they're both overwatering and underwatering. It's substantial, probably half the yields that they could be getting. Here's an issue that cherry orchards had this summer: starting irrigation too late, overestimating how much water was in the soil. These trees are going into the season dry. And then when a heat wave hits, bam, the fruit gets stressed. Now, there's a lot of other horticultural issues going on here, and heat has a big impact on how fruit develop, but soil water is absolutely crucial. A lot of stressed trees out there. And the solution, again, is looking at the weather and putting in some soil moisture meters and knowing what's down there. And of course, you need to be able to adjust your schedule through the season depending on your crop. Here, a full alfalfa crop probably pulls 3 times the same amount, 3 times the water of the same field had it been just cropped. I know this is just a grass field, but you know, you get the idea. A fully cropped field is going to be about 1/3 the water need. So you need to have a system that can account for that so that you can use that water to better effect somewhere else. Here, you know, a gun is watering everything from bare ground and small plants right up to full-size trees. I mean, they have different watering needs. Now, a lot of people will say, this is not a gap. We understand these issues. There's all these resources out there. There's water calculators, there's management guides, there's a pile of fact sheets. I think the point here is that farmers aren't reading them. Until I became a certified irrigation designer, I didn't read them either. They're kind of cobwebbed. We need to have more mechanisms in place, like field days, hopefully this video series that we're coming out with, to encourage people to take a look or at least learn the skills. So the 4-part webinar series, I'll plug it, that Bruce Naka and I put on through the CAI. They're an hour each, and we go through what are the most, we think, crucial concepts in the design manuals to redesign your irrigation system to get that even flow of water, to make sure you're as efficient as possible. So hopefully, as we pile on more in-person and personable education, we can see more use from these resources. The gap is critical. Farms are getting lower yields than they could be, and in fact, dead crops now as climate change gets worse. People need to understand how adding too much water doesn't solve the problem. If you have too much water, you still don't want to apply it. That will also reduce your yields. We need to understand our soils so that we can get our irrigation intervals nailed. And we need to really understand what climate change impacts are having, so that we can, you know, the land and efficiency trade-off, that's a very important one for everyone to understand. If you have a limited amount of water, you don't want to spread it thin across your whole land. You really want to water one smaller area more efficiently and better. If you basically have to water less land or more efficiently, this is where climate change is leaving us, because the province isn't going to increase our water licenses. The gap is solvable. It's solvable with weather stations, with soil moisture meters, with looking at your soil, with hiring professional irrigation designers to come by and take a look, with taking the time to educate ourselves about how to water evenly, how to irrigate evenly, and how to make a schedule that matches the weather and our soil. Our educational videos hopefully will make these kinds of ideas relevant and accessible, and explain these ideas very quickly and simply, rather than the amount of effort that's required to sit down with an irrigation manual. And most importantly, I really encourage whatever ways we can to increase the number of one-on-one farm visits with experts on farms, and the number of field days that bring farmers together in the field to really look at things like how to install a soil moisture meter, how to install a weather station, how to fix an intake, how to use a catch can to measure the evenness of your irrigation, how to do maintenance, all these kinds of things. I've gone way over time. Emily, you've been very patient with me. Thanks very much. I look forward to any questions.
You actually were not over time, Andrew. That was brilliant, right on time, and I think lots of really great information covered. I would be amazed if we didn't have some questions starting to flow in here. So I'm going to just open up the Q&A, and I encourage people to add your questions. So no general question, but I do believe that outreach and information offered for watering, reading your plants is important. I have a learning farm that is an example. The Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Agriculture hopefully can do this too. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Andrew.
Yeah, I think that this is really crucial. This is the main point, is that we need to be talking to each other about these issues and sharing good ideas as they come out. Reading the plants is an interesting one. I think that I'm not really great with the green thumb. Just ask my wife, she's the green thumb. My problem with plants is that they're stressed long before they show it. By the time they're showing symptoms, it's kind of like you need to work on your personal immune system before you get sick. I think a lot of the times what happens is people are waiting for those plant signs, and they're waiting too long. This is where a soil moisture meter is really critical, because it can tell you over time. It's not just, you can't just put in a soil moisture meter and read the meter and, oh, okay, there's the answer. It does take reading your plants, digging into the soil and seeing what is the soil actually like when the meter gives me this number. There's work to learning how to use them, but they can alert you when the soil is dry and the plants may be getting stressed long before the plant shows any signs. So that's a point I'd like to make there.
Thanks, Andrew. That's great. And it looks like we've had a couple of questions related to ET, so evapotranspiration, someone asking how you would measure it, and someone else asking whether it's actual or potential.
Yeah, those are great questions. So evapotranspiration is measured using an equation. It's guessed. So it's not the actual evapotranspiration. What we're doing is measuring basically 4 key weather variables. That's temperature is critical, solar radiation in addition to temperature. So that's literally whether the sun's shining or not, humidity, and wind speed. And those factors get piled into this quite complex equation that's been developed over many years through trial and error, through experimentation, through measuring actually how much water different crops used under different conditions. And it's been pieced together over years. It's a really fantastic result, because now we can, with weather stations, we can get that humidity, wind, temperature, and radiation information, and ET gets cranked out. Now they give you ET for a crop, an idealized crop of grass. So that ideal crop of grass is something that's maybe about 12 inches, 16 inches high, growing really fast with lots of fertilizer, plenty of water in the soil, ideal conditions. So you're taking an ideal condition grass. This is how much water it's going to use. So then what you have to do is you go to a bunch of tables or your experience, and you adjust that grass ET for your crop. So maybe it's early season and your crop's not using very much. Maybe you'd half that ET. Maybe it's peak season and your cherry crop is pumping through water and using way more water than a grass. Then you might use 20% more than that grass reference crop. Now, where do you get these values? Currently, the best place, the easiest place in BC to get them is from Farm West. We'll be having some videos out on that. You can see it in the webinars too. Farm West has this weather station network, and they calculate this grass reference ET for you on a daily basis. The problem, especially here in Southeast BC, is we don't have many weather stations. So the real issue here is that we need more people getting on board, putting in weather stations and connecting them to the network. Andy Nadler is the provincial expert in all of this, and you can bug him about how that's all going to go down. He's installing a bunch of weather stations in Creston with a group there right now. So we're really excited about that.
Okay, Andrew, they're piling in here, the questions.
Okay, I'll try and shorten up my answers.
So looking at challenges in the future, ought we to prioritize irrigation to farms that are efficient or first in time, first in right for licensing? Are there ways to incentivize best practices?
Yeah, well, I am not the expert on licensing. I try and steer clear. I try and leave that to the gurus at the ministry. You can bug Andrew Peterson or Ted Vandergulik on November 22nd and November 30th upcoming. There are webinars with both of those guys on water licensing. Bug them about that. As I understand, don't hold me to this. As I understand, if you have first in time, first in right licensing, that's it. The government can try and incentivize you to be more efficient, but if you are an inefficient farm with a license from 1930, you still have higher priority than somebody with a year 2000 license. So that's just the way it is. Are there ways to incentivize best practice? Absolutely. I personally think the government should throw a lot more money at the problem. And I also think that farms need to take a business planning approach to their crops. I often go through the calculation showing people, for example, how if they put in a center pivot to replace their wheel moves, even in the absence of government funding, they can pay that thing off in 5 to 7 years with improved yields, lower labor, lower power bills, and in the end, they're going to have less water used so they can use that extra water on more fields to grow even more crops. 5 years is actually, it's very conservative general estimate for that replacement. So I think that there need to be ways for farms to quickly access that funding with low interest rates so that they can make those infrastructure improvements.
Great, thanks. So I think you've answered the question about the ballpark number for money a farmer can save or earn by increasing efficiency. By hiring an irrigation specialist to help them better understand how to apply their water. I've kind of touched on that.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, if someone like Bruce comes along, they can identify really cheap fixes that will save you a pile of money and save you a pile of water. It is worthwhile. Yeah, money well spent is having a pro come by your place.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one more. Just trying to make sure I keep us on track. So yeah, what are the on-farm benefits of improving irrigation relative to the time and investment needed? I remember telling my dad about the benefits of computerizing more of his dairy operation. He said the benefits were not worth the time it would take to learn to work with the computer and how to adapt his operation to work with the computer. Are farmers not using all the information that is available because there are other things they can apply their time to that have more benefit on their farms?
Interesting one. You know, where I've seen dairies with computerized systems, they've saved a pile of time and happier cows. So I think that maybe there is, that's just my opinion. I'm no dairy person, but I'd say definitely in irrigation, the time and money savings from certain levels of automation and improving basic things like even just sprinkler nozzles, getting your spacing right, making sure that your pressures and flows are correct, making sure your pipe sizes are right. I mean, this is basic stuff. It's definitely cheaper to do it at the outset. The problem is there's a lot of poorly designed systems out there that need retrofitting now. So if you're designing a new system, definitely get some professional input. But you think about all the time, I think of all the veggie farms I visit, and they're turning on valves and on and off all day long, and they're forgetting that the valve is on, or forgetting that they haven't turned the valve off, and they only have the time that they're in the garden to do it. Automating a system like that is so cheap compared to the labor savings that you can spend doing other things. Absolutely. Yeah, technology is part of the answer here.
So I think we have one comment here that I'll just quickly flag, and then maybe what we'll do is if there are more questions for Andrew, you're more than welcome to continue to put them into the Q&A, and he can type answers when we move into the next presentation. So there's one more comment here about, I've heard several stories about crops shutting down during the heat dome and not transpiring. In some cases, this led to problems with really wet soils because growers were expecting high ET with the heat. Another example of why soil moisture monitoring is so important. Higher temperatures don't necessarily mean higher ET. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. The real proof is in the pudding, and that's where soil moisture meters shine. You could really figure out how to get your irrigation dialed with just soil moisture meters. The ET is a helpful indicator. Understanding how your crop works and knowing that over a certain temperature, how that affects your ET. Really, they need to have a new set of crop coefficients in that table to be like, and if you go over 35 degrees Celsius or 40 degrees Celsius or whatever it is for your crop, ET goes to zero. So yes, absolutely. Excellent point. All right, so I think with that, there are definitely still some questions coming in. So Andrew, I invite you to type away on that Q&A. And I want to say thank you so much for a very informative and interesting presentation. And I think clearly all the questions show that people were into it. Thanks very much, Emily, a pleasure. Yeah, so I think without further ado, I will start to move us into the next project, which is going to be presented by two presenters. So Leisa Yee is going to get us started off with some background about the series of projects that have been happening in Delta, led by the Delta Farmers Institute. Leisa has been working as an administrative manager supporting growers and the local food industry for 10 years. She manages research projects both for the Delta Farmers Institute and also for the BC Potato and Vegetable Growers Association, and certainly has done quite a lot of work in areas like pest management, climate adaptation, and water management. So lots of projects there. And I'm also going to introduce Andy Nadler, who will be following Leisa. Andy's going to get into some of the details around the salinity monitoring and data sharing project that is currently underway in Delta. Andy, as has already been pointed out, is a great resource as an agricultural meteorologist, providing knowledge and expertise on weather, climate, and agriculture-related initiatives across Western Canada and internationally. And we've been very fortunate to have him involved with several weather and water monitoring projects here in BC, including some work that's been happening up in the Peace region with the Agri-Weather Network there. And this work, of course, that we're going to be discussing for Delta. So Leisa, I think if you want to share your screen, move us along into the next project. You're muted, Leisa.
Okay, we're off to a good start. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Emily. As Emily mentioned, my name is Leisa Yee, and I am the administrator for the Delta Farmers Institute. So I'm going to provide a brief 5-minute overview of Delta's agriculture and irrigation, including the work we've done to date on water management. And then Andy Nadler will present on our current work. So the Delta Farmers Institute was established in 1898, many years ago. And we're a nonprofit organization, and our goals are to improve agriculture in Delta and act as a liaison with all levels of government, and in particular with the municipalities. our organization is about 90 members. We represent 60 farm families, and many are multi-generational families, and they have farmed here in Delta for many decades. So of Delta's municipal land base, 52% is in the agricultural land reserve. So it's protected for farming. And of that 52%, 80% of that is in agriculture production. So that equates to about 20,000 acres. So we have highly productive, mostly lowland soils formed from dialectic deposits, let me say that right, from the Fraser River. And we provide a lot of habitat and food for millions of migratory birds. The main crops we grow here are field and greenhouse vegetables, berries, and forage. So of all the BC acres in the province, we grow 50% of the potatoes and 25% of the field vegetables. We have approximately 200 farms here, and we're fortunate to have larger parcels of farmland in the Metro Vancouver area. So the average size is about 86 acres on the farms. So the Delta agriculture irrigation here is operated by the city of Delta. The hydraulic system is quite extensive. It's approximately 591 kilometers of ditches, 20 outfalls, 3,093 culverts and bridges, and over 100 water level and flow control structures. So in the fall to spring, it's in drainage and flood protection mode. And then from spring to fall, it's in irrigation mode when it provides agricultural water supply. So the system is continually improving. It's a work in progress, but currently not all the growers have limited access to the system for irrigation. So approximately it irrigates about 10,067 acres. And we have the plans to add another 2,200 acres, which is West Ham Island, which is of high value field crops. So the farmers here have increasing challenges, in particular with high water table, winter field ponding, and salinity. So the climate and the environment and climate change, which is why we're here today. Much of the work we've completed in the last 7 years is focused on changing hydrology. And as Emily mentioned in the beginning, our concern is the changes in the environment, which include sea level rise, earlier snow melt, and timing of reduced river flow, as well as major activities in the lower Fraser River. And that includes dredging. There's been talk about removing the George Massey Tunnel, and that was a concern with the farming community. So as earlier snowpack melts, it results in decreased water flows in the summer and late fall when irrigation is in demand. So this also forces the salt water further up the Fraser River, also known as the salt wedge. And Andy will touch a little bit more on that. So this affects our irrigation and water quality and potentially increases salination of soils. So I thought it was important to understand where we are, how we got where we are now, and the work that we've done with the climate and agriculture program. It all started back in 2013. Emily's smiling, yeah, many years ago, it seems, but we started with consultation with producers, the government, and industry specialists. And what came of that was changing hydrology was a high priority. And then in 2015, we did a comprehensive drainage study, and that comprised of surveying growers across the region. And 76% of those growers said that salinity was a problem. And then in 2016, we commissioned a numerical modeling study, and that was a simulation of the salt wedge. And that was done under various river flows, various dredging depths, and also sea level rise measures. And what we came of that was salinity profiles in the lower Fraser River. And we also identified water intake and monitoring locations, which brings us to where we are now, which we started in 2017. And we implemented a near real-time salinity monitoring program. And the purpose of that was to ground truth and support decision-making so that we could identify where we potentially would put irrigation infrastructure and help us manage our water. And then in late 2020, we hired a contractor and they did an overall assessment on the irrigation system and the capabilities for current and future water supply. And that was done under, again, future climate conditions. And it also included some high level options that gave us some insight and costing. So just to conclude, we feel that it's critical to have the science, which is the near real-time data, and that will help us inform us for decision-making and future resiliency. Our outlook is to build a comprehensive monitoring network that provides in-river and in-channel data for more in-depth analysis. However, that will depend on funding. And as Andrew talked intensively about, we'd like to introduce extension work to our growers, and where we'd like to see them doing some precision agriculture, on-farm decision-making, such as irrigation, scheduling, soil moisture meters, and we want to include that with our weather station data. And we do have 2 weather stations in Delta, and we hope to incorporate that into our online programming and help that with our growers. And that's all.
Great. Thank you so much, Leisa. That's a great sort of setting of the stage to talk for Andy to talk a little bit more. Really appreciate all that background. So yeah, I think we'll just transition straight into Andy here if you want to dig in and give people a little more information about the work that's happening now, Andy.
All right, you can see my screen fine? Good. Okay, perfect. Well, thanks, Leisa. That was a super introduction to what I'm going to talk about. Leisa mentioned the 591 kilometers, I think it was, of canals and ditches. What you're seeing is an example of one. In this case, the water flows in, it's used to irrigate. Basically, there's pumps along that irrigate crops throughout the region. As I've been working with the Delta area, it's been a real opportunity, because working in different agricultural areas, you realize there's a lot of similarities in terms of issues, in terms of challenges that are faced. But then you also realize there are certain issues that are very specific to different regions. Now, if you don't farm near the interface of a river and an ocean, you probably don't really appreciate some of the challenges that the region undertakes. Now, Leisa mentioned the salt wedge. I think it's worth explaining a little bit. So this is the region, everything basically south of the Fraser River, where you see the arrows. That is the Delta area. Now, within this area, basically the water's pulled out of the Fraser River for irrigation. Now, as the Fraser River flows out, it varies in terms of intensity. The flow, spring flow is a lot higher, mid-season flow is a lot less. So basically, you have different flow rates. At the same time, you have the constant push of the ocean. Tides go up, down. So you have this interface, and where the arrow points here is this salt wedge. Now, the reason it's a wedge, sometimes it's also the salt toe, is that the salt water is denser than the fresh water. So instead of just mixing, or instead of just having a wall type thing, there's this wedge where the salt water actually undercuts, goes underneath the fresh water. Now, depending on the time of year, as I mentioned, the spring freshet with the melt, the Fraser's flowing hard. Basically, all the Fraser, most of the river, all the way to the ocean is going to be pretty much fresh water. It's good for irrigation. It can be used for anything. No issues. Now, Leisa mentioned there's a lot of withdrawal points. There's a lot of structures on the river. I think there's something like 100 flood boxes, control devices, and stuff like that. There's a few. I've only pointed to a few of them, but these are areas where generally water gets pulled out of the river. Now, again, if the water's fresh, it's all good. It's safe for irrigation, that type of thing. Now, one thing we're seeing though is mid-season, as the snowpack lessens, as the river flow lessens, what happens is this salt water, the toe or the saltwater wedge, it migrates up the river. Now, again, depending on tide, so this happens a couple times a day, this saltwater wedge is moving constantly. So depending where the water's taken out, that's going to really affect the quality of water that goes into these irrigation canals. So If, for instance, the salt water is quite a ways upstream or upriver and the water's being taken out, that can actually fill these canals with salt water. Farmers are pumping that onto their fields, and it can actually be lethal to the crops. So there's a real challenge there in terms of sourcing the right water. Now, throw a few other confusing or compounding elements in there. Emily mentioned in the intro that climate change, well, there's going to be more intense floods and droughts. Droughts mean lower water levels, and they mean higher irrigation demand, so more water extraction. Snowpack melt earlier season is going to be earlier in the season, so you may have that really high runoff in the spring, but lower throughout the summer. So those are issues too. Ocean level rise. So as oceans get higher, that's more push upriver. So another issue in terms of where those intakes are. And then, as I mentioned, irrigation demand. So there's definitely some challenges in there. Now, I think Leisa mentioned some of the monitoring that's taken place, and this is sort of where I came in. There's actually a lot of monitoring going on in the area, but one of the issues is that it's not really available in one place. It's sort of scattered. You can access all of this information, but not in one place. You have to go to a bunch of different websites. So I'm just going to really briefly talk about the different sources here. So Leisa mentioned the salinity monitoring sites. These are near real-time sites located throughout the Fraser River, and at different points, well, constantly, it's monitoring what the salinity level is of the water. So that's going to change all the time. The level as well as the water temperature. So that's being reported in real time. It's available on a website. You can look it up, that type of thing. The Water Survey of Canada also has river level discharge stations. These are all throughout Canada. The Fraser has a whole bunch of them. This happens to be the, I think this is at Hope, which is one of the ones that the farmers tend to look at a lot. Depending what the Fraser River at Hope is doing, if the flow is high versus low, that is going to impact how that salinity is affected downstream. Tide information, that's Canadian Hydrological Services. Again, the tide is an important factor. This gets monitored, well, it gets both monitored and predicted. So there's tide tables, but a lot of this is available. Well, this is all available online as well. You can go to the federal website, get your tide predictions. So that's all there too. And then of course there's Farm West. Andrew mentioned the Farm West weather stations, the data that's freely available to users as well. So there's a lot of information available. Now, I guess to summarize it, and what I see as one of the big challenges is there's a lot of data that's being collected, as I just mentioned, and all of this data is accessible. You can find it on the internet. Now, we all know the internet's a big place, and there's, go find it, you will, or if you look long enough, you will find it. The problem is, I think most people are not going to look that long, or it's a pain to access. You're pulling in different information sources to make your decision. So I think that's one of the big things. So that's one of the priorities, is how can we make this more available? So our objectives, really to provide the DFI, Delta Farmers Institute members and other stakeholders a way to access this disparate information to use operationally, because right now it's very difficult to use operationally. The other piece is figuring out what other sources of information are useful. What would be that missing link that's going to help users get better benefit out of this information? The picture on the lower right, that's Leisa on the left. The fellow on the right, he's a farmer on West Ham Island. He grows a lot of potatoes. He lives about maybe 2 or 3 kilometers from this location, and this happens to be a flood box where you can't see it right now, but there's valves where basically the water gets let in when the water's high and clean. And then when it's either too low or the salinity becomes too high, he's got to head out there and turn off the valve. He's doing it manually. He's out there with a handheld salinity meter. So he's checking it, looking at it, he's going back and forth. It's not an ideal situation in terms of both his time, but also just the accuracy in terms of, if he's driving out there testing it, he's going to miss those key times. He may be turning it off too early. There's a lot of inefficiencies there. These types of things are happening everywhere. Some of the pumps are totally automated, but there's a lot of these types of situations where the information is just it's not readily usable. So the real goal is to put all this information together and then have it available both to users and to studies, things like that, if there's more analysis to be done. And the other piece of it is develop a model to be able to better predict the salinity levels, those types of things, because there's some known measurable factors, so it shouldn't be very difficult once the data is there to be able to model it. So again, these are the locations right now that we have access to data. I described them all, but you can see sort of the geographical spread between the Farm West weather stations, the salinity monitoring sites, and the tide sites, as well as the river sites. Now, as I mentioned, all of these data sources, they're available, from the websites, but it's one thing at a time. You can, you have to go to, in this case, you have to go to 5 different websites to access this information. What I've been working on, and this is where it becomes more of an IT computer or software project, but it's all the nice thing is that systems have become so much better. It's so much easier to use. Integrating data is so much better. So what I've been working on the last few months is taking all those data sources, bringing it into one system. For techies out there, I'm using a Node-RED type handler, which is basically made for IoT type devices. I can pull in anything that's a measurement. It could be on-farm things, weather stations, salinity, whatever. It brings it in and it puts it out to different types of visualization tools. In this case, I think dashboards are the best thing ever. It's really, they've gained popularity because I think that's what everybody wants, to be able to look at something and get a very quick indication of where things are at without having to pour through tables and data and charts and things like that. So what's the easiest way to get this information? And then the other side is archiving. And then also pulling in other data sources. So what I'd like to do, and I'm going to preface this by saying that this is under development. It's functional and totally usable, but one of the big, I guess one of the things that I emphasize with this is going to be an iterative process in terms of the farmers. We need feedback from them. It's been hard the last, I guess, couple of months with harvest and things like that, but we're hoping that in the next little while, as time constraints lift, we can get more feedback from farmers, from other stakeholders. But essentially, looking for feedback of what's the best way to view this information. So right now, there's a few different dashboards that I'm using. But if I'm to look at, and what I'll do is I'll walk you through 2 or 3 of these just to show you a taste of what's available. The actual data, unless you're on the river and looking at the salinity or something, it doesn't matter so much, but more just to show the kind of the concept. So in this case, there's a few main features. One of them is the map view, to be able to see spatially what's going on. So with any location, it's color coded. So as you can see here, and as I described with that salt wedge, these 2 lower sites, so the ones right near the ocean, these are in call it the extreme range. So if we look at actual irrigation recommendations, so we generally use conductivity. This is decisiemens or microsiemens per centimeter in conductivity, which is basically relates to salinity. Anything over 1500 is considered not suitable for irrigating most crops. There's a few salt tolerant crops that can take it, but generally, and you can see the different crops, cranberry, strawberry, those are more sensitive, up to the corn, potato, onion, cabbage. But some of the ones, maybe some wheat, barley, but these are some general indications. Obviously, as a grower, you'd have more of an exact threshold. But as you can see here, so we're at the 9,000. Just for reference, ocean water, pure ocean water is about 50 to 55,000. So this is still quite dilute. It's more on the fresh side, but again, it is toxic to plants. So we can see the 9,000 at Canoe Pass, which is this location here. We can see that Tamboline Gate, so that's this location here. It's at the 3,500. So again, it's not safe for irrigation. Tasker, which Tasker's right up here, more upstream. that's in the safe range. Basically, it's upstream. There's a lot of fresh water flowing through there already. There's been certain times in the last few weeks where it has gone up above the dangerous levels, but in general, these ones are staying low. But again, that could change depending what happens with the tunnel, with some of the effects of climate change, those types of things. We're going to expect some interesting things to happen. So those are some of the actual salinity levels here. Again, there's also the water level values. So how the water level fluctuates. Things like water temperature are also measured in real time from these sensors. And then you can also look at the trends. In this case, we're showing water level and conductivity in the pink. So you can even see with these top two ones, so Canoe Pass and Tamboline, throughout the day, the salinity is constantly varying. So depending on the time of day, you might have a few hours of low salinity, then you may have several hours of high salinity. So again, it's really about timing, what's going on at that certain time. As I mentioned with these ones, there's only some slight salinity boosts, 300 microsiemens here, and that's still, well within that suitable range. But you can see a few little spikes up there. And even digging down, this is one of the specific sites. In this case, this is Canoe Pass. So Leisa mentioned Westham Island, which is right here. Canoe Pass is located, well, here's the picture of it. It's actually on a dock just near the old Westham Island Bridge here. And this one also monitors. So we have, again, the actual conductivity. So we can see, in this case, it's at 9,000. We can see the temporal trend. We can see the irrigation recommendation, minimum and maximum salinity over the past 24 hours. So it went down to 1100 up to 8,700. So you can see quite a range here. Water level in the past 24 hours, and then the past 7 days, looking at how it's fluctuated. So again, you can see some really big peaks, and then just how it moves throughout the 7 days. Another thing, and this is probably where it's going to go a little bit more, is also tying in those other data sources. So in this case, we are pulling data directly from the Farm West stations. There's two stations within the area, Boundary Bay and Westham Island, which is right on the island. So in this case, it's showing the rainfall value from those weather stations as well. So it's rained 8.1 millimeters in the last 24 hours, 44.5 millimeters, so getting close to 2 inches in the past 7 days. So with those weather stations, and this will be the last one I'll show just as a kind of a snapshot, is of course, you can access the information from farmwest.com, but in this case, we are pulling it direct. So here's Boundary Bay. So that's right near the Boundary Bay Airport in Delta. And throughout in this case, it's showing the past 24 hours of rainfall, temperature, max, min, and relative humidity. So you can search along, showing the last 7 days statistics. So you can see, well, what were the minimum temperatures over the past 7 days? And this is all, you can query different dates and stuff. You can see that it's rained every single day except Monday. So lots of rain, maximum wind speed. For wind, you can also, oops, not showing up there, but for wind, you can also see the trends over the past, this case, it's November 8th to 9th, the past 24 hours. So you can see the wind peaks. So in terms of even as management information, looking at, if this were the season, looking at factors like spray drift, those types of things. And then of course, as I showed in the previous screen, how much did it rain in the last, hour, today, last 24 hours, past 7 days. So a lot of it right now, as I mentioned, it is, I guess it's in the works in terms of, it's in development. A lot of these things will be changing just based on stakeholder feedback. Farmers saying, well, wouldn't it be nice to see this or this? So those are things we will definitely be doing. Just to jump back to, oops, sorry, I'm going to jump back to my presentation here. One more slide. So basically where I end off is what's next? Well, as I mentioned, continued stakeholder feedback, getting more input from users to say this is what would be useful for me, for management, for real-time operations, operationally. Additional monitoring points. If you recall the map I showed a minute ago along the Fraser River, there's 4 real-time monitoring points. There's a big gap between them. So ideally, we'd like to put a few more monitoring points to be able to better pinpoint where that salinity is, where that salt wedge lies in real time. One of the things I didn't really mention, well, I have it written there, is bringing in the City of Delta information. City of Delta has quite a few monitoring sites for their SCADA system, so to control and monitor the irrigation, the canals, that type of thing, being able to pull that data in. So we're talking with the City of Delta being able to do it. Right now, it's just they're updating their system, so we're kind of waiting on that. So we're looking forward to that. And then Leisa mentioned things like in-channel type operations, so in-channel salinity and level. So those are things that are very easily doable. Right now, we're sort of, other than the weather stations, everything's kind of within the river, so we can move in channel. One thing I noticed, I've been there a lot of times lately, but if you actually check the salinity at different points within the canal, it's going to be quite different depending on flow, depending on groundwater penetration, all those things. So those are, it'd be quite interesting to look at some of those. And then, of course, this ties right in with what Andrew was talking about. I'm a big believer in soil moisture sensors, irrigation management. I think there's so much that can be done, be it with sensors, be it with evapotranspiration modeling, that type of thing. So we're really looking forward to doing some more on-farm work with things like irrigation. More weather monitoring. Right now, there's 2 weather stations. It'd be great to have a few more just to get that spatial variability. And then, of course, the predictive modeling side. First we measure, then we predict. So with that, I thank you very much. And I guess overall, I appreciate the opportunity to work on this with Delta. It's been a great experience, and I look forward to where it's going.
Thanks so much, Andy and Leisa. This has been really great to hear where things are at with this project. And yeah, I want to throw things open again to people on the line to see if there are any questions for Andy. Please type them into the Q&A. And maybe while we're waiting, if I don't know if Andrew Bennett has any questions for Andy. I kind of was thinking about transferability while you were talking about this, Andy, because obviously Delta is a very specific, place, and these issues on the river are quite specific. But I think there's a lot of aspects to this work that would be of interest to producers all over the province, just around the data, obviously information about water supply, information about weather, localized weather. So yeah, I don't know if there's any thoughts from you, Andy, on that, or any follow-up from you, Andrew.
I'll go first in terms of, yeah, obviously some of the salinity issues are a little bit more unique, but I think every part of the province, well, and outside the province too, is either currently or will be facing water procurement issues in terms of the demand for water is not going to go down. It's irrigation it's a wonderful risk management tool to guarantee production and improve quality, improve yield, that type of thing. So there's going to be more irrigation. There's going to be more demand for the same amount of water. So I think the only way to make it work is to have it efficient. I think in the past there hasn't been a lot of call it motivation to make to have very efficient water use, but I think there's a lot of reasons now, not just there's a lot of reasons, agronomically, environmentally, even just in terms of helping your neighbor out. If you're if it's one of these things where it's a canal or a pipe that's there's only so much water you can pull out of it.
Thanks, Andy. We did have a question pop into the Q&A here that it might be a good one for all of the speakers. What new technology do you think is the most effective in addressing these general water shortage challenges? And where would you like to see more research on innovative tech?
I guess the one thing I would add, since I'm still unmuted, would be just in addition to everything I just said, would be things like where micro irrigation happens. You can do so much with it in terms of applying the water necessary, but again, I think being able to know what's in the soil is so important. If you're putting in water and you don't know if you're underwatering or overwatering, I don't know how you can do it effectively, because like I've worked with moisture probes a lot, and I'm a huge fan because you can literally see what's going on in that soil, how deep the water is, whether you're losing water nutrients or whether you're not getting enough into the root zone. So I think technology, that's an amazing one. Unfortunately, the price is still pretty high on soil moisture sensors. So there are other tools like, evapotranspiration monitoring, like just even the checkbook method, figuring out this is what's being used, this is what's being added. It's simple, but it's effective. And then, even just irrigation design, we know that different production areas, doesn't matter what the crop, they use different amounts of water. So why water them the same, as well as your soil's different, your slope, your drainage, everything like that. So if you're putting uniform water on, there's no doubt, I can promise you, you're overwatering some areas and underwatering other areas, which are, they're not the best for the crop. Did I miss anything, Andrew?
I don't think so, Andy, but definitely there are some new technologies out there that I find interesting. The ideal technology from a farmer's perspective eliminates the labor. There are so many people out there moving wheel moves and hand lines or turning valves on and off, and they're spending so much time doing that there's not any time left over to make sure that the nozzles are fixed and the gaskets are replaced, so there's leaks everywhere, or to make sure that it's matching the schedule. It's just survival mode irrigation. The ideal technology eliminates that labor and applies the right amount of water at the right time. I've seen a very interesting system. I think it's Illinois. They call it 360 rain, and it's a GPS guided boom that travels around your farm dragging a pipe and can cover 80 acres per one of these units in our area. That's what I calculated it would do. 80 acres, and it's all purely automatic, and it can be on any kind of weird shaped field. And unless you're in the Fraser Valley, most places in BC have very odd shaped fields that don't always fit a pivot. So I do think that there's some interesting tech there. My question to Andy, I like some of these other questions coming in, but my question to Andy is also about, when I see the Salinity project, what I really like is that it's a single place where people can go with all the data in a dashboard. And I'm imagining something similar, broader scale across the province that tackles a lot of what Farm West is trying to do, but is difficult to get out of Farm West, like having your temperatures and your heat degree days and your evapotranspiration all in one space, and maybe connecting in soil moistures from certain test plots as well. I was wondering what you think about the feasibility of putting together a system that's more pan BC.
I think that'd be great. Yeah, absolutely. Like I think there's a lot of custom systems out there and stuff. I think, yeah, if there was something that could be built, and I know like I've done some provincial assessments and stuff and have recommended on the weather side, but on the irrigation side too, I think that's the big thing, because really, you could have the best science, you can have the best equipment ever, but unless it's delivered in a digestible way to the user, it doesn't really mean anything. It's sadly, a lot of it just comes down to user interface, availability, that type of thing.
Sorry, I was typing a response to a question.
Emily, can I ask Heidi's question? Because it's one thing I've always wanted. I'd love to hear Andy's point of view.
Please jump
I
in.
want to know, Heidi's asked, if you have salinity damage, what can you do? How do you fix that?
Well, I'm no expert in that side of it, but I've dealt with salinity over the years, and even I've done a lot of my work in the prairies, where you do have salinity from, not necessarily from irrigation, but coming up from the soil when evapotranspiration and being leached up, basically. But generally, it needs to be washed down. So it's a weird thing where if it's in there, you basically need to try and wash it out of that root zone, because you can't bring it up. And what happens if you have a lot of basically upward movement of your soil water, that is gonna deposit the salinity back into your root zone again. So it's essentially washing it through the root zone is the main thing. So it's kind of interesting. In terms of the damage, though, I've heard some horror stories of, it's one thing with an annual crop where you maybe suffer some yield loss, or worst case, you lose the crop. But with perennials, it can be huge. Things like cranberries, where there's a massive investment just in establishing that crop. So it can be very expensive if you actually do permanently damage the plants themselves, because that could be replanting. So it's massive.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. So there is, I think, just one more question in the Q&A here that it'd be great to put out there, and then maybe we'll move to wrap things up. Although if any more questions come in, we can also potentially type some responses. So final question here: as climate change is a global and more practically provincial issue, do you see improving farm management data as best done ad hoc by separate organizations, or is there room for a provincial scale program with downscale data models for every farm in the province and data sharing? Does keeping weather station data private create a competitive advantage for some farms over others?
I
Big
love that question.
picture question.
It's a loaded one, but I love the concept of being able to offer some of these tools in terms of just it's kind of like what Andrew was saying, is being able to just be able to help deliver some of these, because right now there's not a lot out there just in terms of options. But in terms of the competitive advantage, I think there are places where if it's a vineyard going up on a hill or something, that might be data that's somewhat proprietary in terms of you're scoping out there's some financial elements to it. But in general, with weather data, I'm a big fan of sharing weather data, because a weather station, they're expensive, they're a pain, but they can be used for more purposes. Once you get to other sensors, like things like soil moisture sensors, that's very different, because how I manage my soil moisture, it's none of my neighbor's business, nor is it there's no use in them seeing how I'm using those types of things. But I think for things like how much did it rain, what's the temperature, frost, those types of things, I think ideally you could get a group of farmers together to get one weather station between them and get some really good information.
Yeah, I'd second that. I think weather data is a public good. I'd also say that Farm West is already pseudo-provincial. I mean, it's run by, the Pacific Corn Growers Association technically, but it's really a provincial system. So a lot could be done to expand on that basis. Did you agree, Andy?
Yeah, for sure.
Another public good thing I thought I'd mention in terms of climate change, you mentioned micro irrigation earlier. And certainly if you're trying to grow a crop and there's extreme water scarcity, trying to figure out whether it's micro irrigation or whatever irrigation system it is, there's a lot to choose from. You can really reduce how much water you need. On the other hand, if you have sufficient water, I really recommend people, using cover crops and really trying to grow as much biomass on their land as possible, even if it's not all food for sale. Even if a lot of that cover crop is going back into building the soil. Really what gets missed a lot in water management is how much of it is soil management. And we need all of the sequestered carbon possible to be going into humus and feeding the soil food web and building up carbon in the soil, not only so that we can sequester carbon, it's its own mitigation to climate change, but also because more soil holds more water. It's the number one way that we can drought proof ourselves. So right now, across BC, we still have enough water. And if we still got enough water in our licenses, we need to be irrigating as efficiently and as effectively as possible in order to build soil. And that's going to be our real insurance against climate catastrophe.
That's such an excellent way to send everybody off, Andrew. It's a good, very big picture. And yeah, soils. I mean, I'm confident we could have lots of very excellent content on soils to share with people as well. So on that note, I am gonna wrap up, and I want to say a big thank you again to all three of our speakers for your excellent presentations. And I do just kind of want to highlight again that I think that these projects, you know, they're quite distinct, but they're also about improving the resources that are available to producers. And I think they really open up the invitation for all of us to think about how we can build on this work and share it. There are a lot of opportunities to take forward the lessons that Andrew Bennett shared, to share and expand the resources that are available to support producers with water management. And as I already highlighted, I think the project in Delta, while it is a very specific location and water resource, I think this type of monitoring and development of the related informational resources is really something that producers are interested in a lot of parts of BC. So there's definitely some transferable work here that that we can all be building on together looking forward. So yeah, just a final thank you to all of you as well on the line for coming and for all of the questions. It was a very good session from an engagement perspective, so that's much appreciated. And if you'd like to stay up to date on our work, which I hope you would like to, and you know, to find out the very moment that that Delta stuff goes up online and the videos that Andrew was talking about go up online, please do subscribe to our e-newsletter. I think it will be going into the chat for people to see the link there, or you can also do it through our website. And finally, just to remind everybody that we will be sharing a roll-up of all the resources that were mentioned today with a follow-up email, and then at a later date, we'll be sharing all of the recordings from the whole series of webinars, which is now, this series is wrapping up. And it's been great to have the experience to share all this work, and we hope that you all have a very good day, and thanks so much.